Matt Helmers is professor and director of the Iowa Nutrient Research Center at the Iowa State University. He holds a master's degree from Virginia Polytech Institute and State University and a PhD from Iowa State University. His research interests are in the area of water management and water quality, specifically non-point source pollution, drainage, in-field performance of vegetative filters, and the impact of crop and animal production systems on Iowa's water resources. Matt?
Thanks, Fabian, and thanks for the invitation to be here today. It's a real pleasure, and I'm like the warm-up act before Dr. Christensen talks. She'll set me straight on everything, and I'll like leave the room before that happens. But sorry, I'm gonna talk. And so most of what I'll show is Iowa data. I recognize that, but at least it's in the northern third of Iowa, so we're getting close to Minnesota, and a lot of similarities in soil. So we're gonna shift from just talking about the agronomic impacts of nitrogen management, but thinking about nitrogen management from a water quality standpoint and ways that we can reduce that or mitigate some of that nitrate leaching. Why are we concerned about this? I think if we think of what's been the focus for much of today, it's thinking about that resource that we're using, that input of nitrogen. If we're losing that to the environment, whether through gas emissions or nitrate loss, we're losing a resource that could have otherwise been used for crop production. And then certainly local and drinking water concerns. If we think about local water supplies, shallow wells, certainly read about a lot of issues of that in Minnesota. We have that in Iowa as well. And then both Iowa and Minnesota have something else in common that, not all of our water ends up in the Mississippi River. Not all of Minnesota's water ends up in the Mississippi River. But Gulf of Mexico hypoxia is driving a lot of issues in our state and I think in Minnesota as well. So sometimes I like to start and think about this, how water is moving to a downstream water body. Maybe that's an aquifer or our streams. And certainly is in Iowa, I hear a lot about that tile drainage causes nitrate loss, with the intimating that we don't see nitrate loss from non-tiled landscapes. But if we think about our well-drained soils and our soils with poor natural drainage, we still have that infiltrating water and nitrate that's being lost with that infiltrating water, even without tile drainage. And so, certainly in Minnesota, as you think about some of your aquifers and we think about the sand regions, certainly, you have high nitrate in some of the shallow groundwater. That's not because of tile drainage, but leaching from our annual corn soybean system. Where we have the subsurface drainage, that's a delivery mechanism of that nitrate right to the stream. I view that as a good thing and a bad thing. Well, it's bad that it's delivering nitrate, okay? It's not good thing, might not be the right way. Okay, now this is recorded, I gotta be careful, okay? Okay, it's an opportunity. So we know where the nitrate is coming out and we can treat that. I'm an engineer by training, so I think, well, we can engineer some solutions. So as we think about nitrogen management, infield and edge of field, we need to start doing the best job we can infield, but where we have this tile drainage, we have an opportunity to treat that water and nitrate before it's delivered to the stream. Okay, so when I hear somebody say tile drainage causes nitrate loss, tile drainage may facilitate nitrate loss in some of these landscapes because it allows the annual crop production in areas that wouldn't otherwise be possible. So I think sometimes I think of it as a little bit like chicken and the egg type of thing. I do think that it's important to think about why we have some of the nitrate problems that we do. Sometimes when I read the news, at least in Iowa, it's intimated that it's primarily an over-fertilization problem. But I think it's unfortunately a little bit more complex than that. And so this is a slide a colleague of mine, Mike Castellano, put together where the red line would be the rate of soil nitrate production from soil organic matter, and the green line would be the rate of nitrate uptake by the corn or soybean plant. And if we look at that red line and the green line, do you see a problem? Okay, and a problem that maybe is impacted also by the weather, the weather patterns we frequently get in southern Minnesota and Iowa, or the upper Midwest, which is we get excess precipitation in the spring of the year when we have that gray area there. And so we'd have susceptibility to nitrate loss. For example, at the site that I'll show you here in a second, and near Gilmore City, we've monitored for over 30 years artificial subsurface drainage, and we get about 70% of our annual drainage in April, May, and June, when we primarily don't have anything growing out there because of this, even without fertilizer inputs. I think, Jeff, your Wasika data kind of similar when you get a lot of your drainage and nitrate loss. So now we can think about this red line and green line if we had different cropping systems out there. You know, if we have a cover crop out there, that may help us reduce, say, some of this gray area in the spring or fall of the year if we get growth of that cover crop. Alternative crop rotations might help us. I'll ask you to think about, what do you think the red line and green line would look like for a native prairie? Okay. Now, I don't know, I don't have data that exactly shows the red line and the green line, but I'll show you some data about the nitrate loss that we monitor when we restored prairie on areas that were bulk cropped prior, okay? And just to kind of maybe illustrate that a lot of this is, you know, we have an annual cropping system where once there may have been a perennial, and this is a slide, a graph that a colleague of mine, Bill Crumpton, put together summarizing monitored data from across the Upper Miss and Ohio River basins and related the nitrate concentration at that monitoring point to the percent cropland within that watershed. And we see a pretty strong relationship that as we increase annual row crop production, we increase that nitrate concentration at the watershed scale. So now we can think about what can we do about it. And, you know, there's a lot we can do about it, from the 4Rs to some of our cropping systems to the edge of field practices. So across Iowa, we have a number of drainage water quality monitoring stations similar to this, similar to Jeff Vetch and Fabian have, and others, and similar to what's across the region. This is just a slide of what one looks like from an aerial image of our drainage water quality plots. You'll notice here, these areas that look yellow, I'll show you the data from this in a minute. Those are no nitrogen plots out there, okay? So we definitely see a coloration difference in those. I think we see 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Should be 4 reps of the no nitrogen treatment. Okay, the first set of data I'll show you is from our drainage research facility near Gilmore City, north central Iowa. Started in 1989. All the drains were in place in 89. There was no drainage, so 1990 is the first year of drain flow that we have there. This one violates all of the rules about a graph. Like, there's too much data on this graph, right? But I think it's super important. This follows through, and I need to update this because we have a little more updated data, but essentially 30 years of drainage water quality data at the same nitrogen management that whole time. Corn, soybean rotation, early spring side dress application of nitrogen, 150 to 160 pounds, which would be on the kind of the upper end of the profitable range of the MRTN. And as we look at this, the average nitrate application over this whole period is about 13 to 15 milligrams per liter of nitrate nitrogen, so above the drinking water standard. But you'll see that's the blue dots. You know, we had a high in 2013 of about 22 milligrams per liter. We had a low in 1993 of about 7 milligrams per liter. So there's few things to take from this maybe. If we just monitored any 3 to 5 year period during this 30 years, we could come to different conclusions. If we, just looked at 1990 to 1993, well, we see this decreasing trend in nitrate concentration. One might conclude if we apply it this, we'll decrease that nitrate concentration. Conversely, if you monitored in the early 2000s, when I started there, we saw an increasing trend. If we look at that whole period, there's not really any kind of defined trend in increasing or decreasing nitrate concentration at that application rate. It's over that whole period pretty stable if we run a trend line through that for the whole 30-year period. Okay. The other things, I guess, so that nitrate concentration does vary primarily because of the weather, and you see that with the drainage is the green squares. The nitrate loss is the triangle, red triangle. And you can see those kind of follow one another pretty closely, that amount of drainage that we get in a given year is strongly influenced by how much the nitrate loss that we get in any given year is strongly influenced by how much drainage we get. Okay. The other thing, we've used some of our data and added in some other data from Iowa. And we can see here, not quite as dramatic as the relationship of dissolved P to soil test phosphorus that we saw in one of the earlier presentations. But certainly as we increase nitrogen application rate, we do see we increase nitrate concentration. You'll note even when we apply no nitrogen, if we get back to that red line and green line, we still see what I'd say is maybe elevated levels of nitrate in our tile drainage water. I'll show you a little more data on this from one of our other sites here in a minute. Okay, so some of the things we can do within field management to help us with nitrate loss, I'll talk about here. One is cover crops. I'm going to show you some cover crop data from this same site. One of the things that we found at many of our sites is that tillage and use of no-till, we couldn't rely on consistently for nitrate reduction. We found that at a Northeast Research Farm site. I'll show you some data from that site, but not on the no-till. But one of the things we converted at Gilmore City, plots to no-till in 2010. And we've been able to monitor that for a 10-year period now. Well, actually a little more, but we published this from 2011 through 2020. If we look at that first 5 years of no-till, we saw that use of no-till decreased our nitrate loss about 72 pounds. But we look at the second 5-year period when maybe we saw some changes that had happened with our soil system, we saw very little reduction with no-till in that. If we look at conventional till versus no-till. So kind of consistent, if we think over the long term, maybe we don't see as much positive impact of tillage or lack thereof in reducing nitrate loss. Okay, how about cover crops? If we look at this is winter cereal rye, where we had tillage, so some tillage with and without winter cereal rye. Over this 10-year period, we saw about 111 pound per acre nitrate reduction cumulative over that 10-year period when we used winter cereal rye. And I will say we didn't get tons of, and I mean that, like, we didn't get tons per acre of winter cereal rye growth. I don't have it in here, but it was not always the best winter cereal rye growth. We got some, but we did see an impact. Okay, now how about if we do no-till with and without cover crops? This one was interesting, and again kind of illustrates how long-term data might be important. So this is no-till with and without cover crops. That first 5-year period, we didn't see any additional benefit of the cover crop in reducing nitrate loss. Okay, remember that the no-till one already came down compared to conventional till. But the second 5-year period, we do see. So the first 5-year period, really no impact. Second 5-year period, we're seeing almost 10 pound per acre per year reduction in nitrate loss when we use the winter cereal rye cover crop. And again, growth of cover crop, but not we were not knee high or thigh high cover crop when we killed it in the spring. And we're still seeing benefits of this. So, you know, some people in Iowa say, well, you can't grow cover crops like north of I-80 or north of Highway 20. Well, we're doing it and seeing the benefit. You know, Minnesota, it's maybe a little more of a challenge, but I still think there may be potential depending on when we get it seeded and what kind of growth we get. Okay, so let's go to our Northwest Research Farm. This is a site where we're collaborating with Fabian on, it's part of our Nutrinet project, but we have 4 different treatments there, okay? 3 different timing treatments. So we have fall anhydrous with a nitropyrin, spring anhydrous, split application, 40 pounds as urea starter, and then 95 in-season agrotane treated urea. And then we have a no nitrogen treatment, okay? Here. Quickly on this one, really no difference in nitrate concentration between the corn phase or the soybean phase of the system. So combined them, here's what we see from 2015 to 2020. Should say we have corn or soybean present in every year, 4 reps. We see no difference in the flow weighted annual nitrate concentration between that fall N or the spring N, okay? That fall N is applied when soils are 50 degrees and cooling, and it's an anhydrous with the inhibitor. Over this period, we didn't see any difference. Split N, we did see a reduction in nitrate concentration where we split applied that nitrogen. We saw additional reduction where there was no nitrogen applied, okay? But again, that nitrogen concentration with no N was still about 8 milligrams per liter compared to 12 or 13 where we applied nitrogen. So we can make incremental gains with nitrogen management, but it's not like when we apply no nitrogen, our nitrate concentration in a corn soybean cropping system is 0. Sometimes I like to say this, the nutrient reduction strategy, at least in Iowa, calls for a 45% reduction in nitrate delivery down the stream or nitrogen delivery. If we were just going to do that with infield nitrogen management, we'd have to essentially go to no nitrogen application in our corn soybean cropping system. When I talk to farmers, there aren't very many that are wanting to do that, right? Okay. I don't think that would be the best way anyway, because it may have negative soil health implications. But I think this illustrates that you know, nitrogen management can make a difference, but there are limitations to what it can do. Okay. Long story short, here on the corn yield impact, we saw no difference on average over the whole period. The average between the 3 different nitrogen application treatments, but we did in 2017. You'll notice here our split N application was lower. That was a statistically significant difference in 2017. We only got 1 inch of rain post applying that in-season nitrogen. So I think we didn't get utilization of that movement down into the soil profile. So you know, we have to maybe use that a little bit with caution on thinking about that. Okay. Try to get through these quick. Our Northeast Research Farm, we had some treatments that were similar to the discussion about manure application and cover crops. We also looked at the nitrate leaching. So we had an early manure with cover crops, and a late manure, liquid swine manure in this case. Corn soybean rotation, where the manure was applied for the early manure as close after soybean harvest as we could. And what we saw was that when we applied that manure early in the fall, we saw higher nitrate concentrations in that leachate from that system. We were able to mitigate that by the use of a cover crop. So you'll notice the early manure with cover crop is really similar to the late manure. And this is in the corn phase of the system. Now that's all fine and dandy. That's important, I think, but you know, it's important to environmental person. But what about the yield impacts? And this is kind of somewhat consistent with what we saw earlier today. But what we saw was, especially if you look at column 2 and 6, that early manure versus late manure, we saw a dramatic yield hit when we were using early manure in that system. You know, 194 in 2016 with the late manure, 168 with the early fall manure application. Okay. What we didn't see, I guess we did in 1 year, see a yield benefit when we used the cover crop in that with the early fall manure, but in general, kind of no difference in 2017, actually yield reduction, probably because nitrogen tie up in 2016, then no difference again, or as I said, yield benefit in 2018. So I think there are some potential crop yield benefits of getting that manure on later in the season when soils are 50 degrees and cooling. There's also an environmental benefit. Certainly there's a logistical reason why some people apply early, but at least in Iowa, we see a lot of manure going down in late September, very early October in north central Iowa when the soils are probably 70 degrees. And then, you know, people say, well, it's not available. Well, I don't think that it wasn't available. It's that you've lost it from the system in those cases because you put it out at a period you wouldn't put your commercial nitrogen. We also looked at spring manure at that site. Now, no water quality difference, but we saw this was in continuous corn. We saw a big yield benefit of spring manure application compared to late manure application. Okay. Now, people really don't want to do spring application because they're worried about compaction. And I will grant you that this is on a site that has pretty intense drainage in it. So it's pretty well-drained system, but at least we're talking to some producers about that. Not move all to spring application, but could you move some to spring application? So then maybe you don't have to apply it as early in the fall. Okay, the last one on the specifically monitoring from the drainage from infield management. I mentioned to you before about prairie. So this is looking at 10-year summary of cumulative nitrate loss from a continuous corn system, a continuous corn with cover crop system, or two prairie systems, one where there's nitrogen fertilizer. I don't need to show you any statistical tests on that to tell you we see a dramatic reduction when we have prairie out there from a nitrate. You know, we look at continuous corn over that period, we lost a little over 140 pounds of nitrogen. If we look at the prairie, we lost about 8 pounds cumulative over that 10-year period. Okay. Now, unfortunately, there's no economic market for that prairie right now, right? So, but I think it's important for us to recognize when we have that perennial system out there, we dramatically reduce our nitrate loss. Okay. Now, what can we do to treat that water or hold that water back if we have those drainage systems? So I'm going to talk a little bit about all of those. And so we have our drainage water management, where we're managing the outflow of that drainage system and holding water back during certain times of the year with our control structures that we have there. We've been able to see that reduces our annual nitrate delivery downstream. This is from a regional assessment all the way from included South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, not Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and North Carolina. And so we saw about a 30% reduction in downstream nitrate delivery out of the tile where we manage that water table back in the field. Where we do have free drainage in the spring and the fall of the year, but then in the summer and winter months, we're trying to hold that water back. So definitely a potential. One of the challenges with this is I think we need a pretty flat field. I'd say less than 1 or 0.5%. Some say maybe up to 2%, but really our management zones, we want only about a 1 to 2 foot elevation difference within those management zones. The next one, we have our subsurface drainage bioreactor. Dr. Christensen is a world leader on this one. And so in this, we're taking that drainage water, running it through a carbon media trench and promoting denitrification. In fact, if you're really bored tomorrow at noon, we have a webinar talking about some different carbon media, specifically corn cobs that might be able to be used by a colleague of mine, Dr. Michelle Sapir. But primarily we've been using wood chips, and we're promoting denitrification within that system. We aren't sending all of the water through this wood chip trench. we're just diverting some of that water because it really would probably not be economically feasible to route all of the water through that denitrification bioreactor, but have been shown to be very, very effective, and I think a lot more potential for implementation of these throughout the upper Midwest. Okay, just quickly, here's a drone video of installing one of these. They're just digging the wood chip trench, line it with plastic, and then put wood chips in there. So fairly straightforward to do. This is one that we put in Northwest Iowa in the summer of 2019 was when this one was installed. Okay, the next one. So we might be able to get 30 to 50% nitrate reduction from these systems. Is that about right, Laura? You think that a little high? Okay, 20 to 40. Okay, 20 to 40. Okay, good. All right. The next one, kind of maybe similar reductions, is that, you know, we have a lot of buffers next to our streams. This is great. And certainly in Minnesota, even more buffers than in Iowa. You know, once Iowa led the nation in buffers, probably not anymore. Okay. But we have all these buffers, and in many of these areas with tile drains, that tile line was going directly under that buffer. We really weren't getting any benefit from a nitrate reduction standpoint. So some colleagues, Dan Janes and Tom Eisenhart, said, well, we can do something different. What if we put one of those control structures in, run a tile line along the upstream edge of that buffer, and promote shallow groundwater flow below the buffer? And what they found is that, you know, that zone below the buffer, especially if we have the right soils, can be very effective for denitrification and nitrate removal. And again, they might be able to get that 30 to 50% nitrate reduction in this type of system. And if we have the buffer there, we have the soil conditions, and we can get, you know, a long stretch of that lateral, can be pretty cost effective, you know, and it's not one that we would have to replace. That's the challenge with the bioreactor. At some point in time, we're going to have to replace those wood chips. So another practice that can be quite effective and on the landscape. Okay, now I'm biased, but this is my favorite. Yeah, I am biased on this one. That bias isn't the right word, but this is the one I like the best because I think it provides a whole host of benefits that people like, which is a nitrate removal wetland. And so this is what a picture of another one. But in this case, instead of thinking about it on a field scale, we're looking at more of a watershed scale. So we might have an area 1,000 acres in size, all draining to one common point. We can put in, you know, construct an earthen berm there, put in some type of control structure, a large weir, and impound water there. These are probably areas that were historically wetlands, hydric soils. And so we can construct this wetland and have a buffer area around that wetland. If we think about this provides other benefits that some in society might like, of waterfowl habitat, you know, maybe honeybee habitat or bee habitat, pollinator habitat, monarch butterfly habitat in the buffer around there as well. One of those wetlands where the wetland pool occupies approximately 1% of the contributing area has been shown to reduce long-term average nitrate delivery downstream about 52%. Okay, so now we might need a couple more percent with the buffer around there, but all told, we might be talking about 3% of the land area to reduce downstream nitrate delivery 50% on average. Okay, seems like a pretty good trade, unless you own that land, but I think there are programs to help incentivize and pay for that. Okay, another one that has been taking off in Iowa, I think there might be some opportunities here. This has really been led by the Nature Conservancy in Iowa, Iowa Soybean Association, and the University of Iowa, is restoring oxbows next to streams, but specifically outletting tile drainage water into those oxbows. And so that's why you'll notice the term multi-purpose. So not only maybe for habitat, but we want to make sure that nitrate gets into that oxbow through a drain line, okay? And again, I think there are a lot of opportunities for these, and they may be relatively low cost because they may already be areas that aren't in intensive crop production. And so we can route that drainage water into that multi-purpose oxbow, okay? And if we look at this, this is at least from some of the information we've summarized. I think Dr. Christensen will have more information, but all of these do a pretty good job on removing nitrate beyond the land area that occupy. And so this is looking at the nitrate removed per acre, kind of of the contributing area. So if it's, for the wetland, say there were 1,000 acres coming into that wetland might remove on average about 1,100 or 11,000 pounds of nitrate in any given year. So we can then scale this up by how many acres are being treated by these. But all of these can be really quite effective and have what I would say are disproportionate benefits. They are providing benefits much greater than the land area they occupy. The last one I'll talk about is one that a colleague of mine, Dr. Chris Hay, in Iowa, he and I are doing some work on this, and I think this is like I won't say the future because we'll see if it works, but this could be the future of water management in these landscapes. As I talk to farmers, I frequently say, would you like to have a couple inches of water back that you had go downstream early in the year? And they almost all of them say yes. So from an engineering standpoint, I'm firmly convinced we can design these systems. Whether they're economical, that's the real question. But our drainage water recycling system, or I like to say our rain barrel on steroids. So if you live in an urban area, you have a rain barrel. This is like the rain barrel on steroids. We're going to capture that drainage water either through gravity or we're going to pump it into some type of storage pond. And then we're going to use that water as supplemental irrigation. Now we could use it with a center pivot like you see on the right, or we could do sub-irrigation like we see on the left. Again, I think this is, there's potential with this, but as you look at this, you may say, that looks like a lot of pumps and a lot of management, which it is, and land for that, for the pond. So the real questions are there enough benefits to outweigh that? And that's kind of what we're looking at. But as we think about it, this is one practice that we are reducing downstream water delivery. And when I say that, it's mainly from the spring flows that we would be capturing that. We're capturing those nutrients in that water and reusing them in the field rather than having them go downstream. So it may have a nutrient reduction benefit and a crop production benefit. So just to kind of aerial views of a couple sites that we have in Iowa. This is a case where there was a drainage way here. They put a earthen embankment right there. So you can see the reservoir here. The reservoir area is about 2.7 acres. This irrigated area is about 53 acres. And this one, it's gravity flow into the reservoir and then pumped out to the center pivot. Another one here, the reservoir about 2.5 acres in size. Both this one and the previous one, that reservoir is in an area that hasn't been cropped. So there was not, the opportunity cost for the ponds in these cases relatively low because they're not taking cropland out of production. This irrigated area is 58 acres. In this case, they capture some drainage, but also they have a withdrawal permit from that stream. So they're taking water that would have, was already in the stream and would have gone downstream, and they're able to use that to fill their reservoir, specifically, most specifically in the spring of the year when there would be relatively high flow conditions in that stream. And then another one in this case, pumping out of the drainage district main into that reservoir, which is 3.2 acres. And then the pivot is irrigating 105 acres, okay? The first, I should order these differently, but the first and third site have only been in place a year to two. So we're just starting to capture some of the yield information from those, but I do have some water quality. The second site, here, we'll do this first, okay, was installed, I think 2015, and then they've used supplemental irrigation 2016, 2017, 2019, 2021, and 2022. All of these corn years. 2020 was a soybean year at that site, but we had the derecho come through and it knocked the pivot down. So we didn't get any data in 2022, but we really want to know the impact of this on soybeans. This field has a treatment area and control area of it. If we look at the years when there was no supplemental irrigation used, the treatment area underperformed the control by 3 bushel per acre per year, 3 bushels per acre, sorry. So really the same yield between the treatment and control area. If we look at the years when they used supplemental irrigation, we saw on average a 43 bushel per acre yield benefit on corn, okay? So then that, you know, as we move forward, then the question is, what's the economic benefit of that, okay? If we look at what we've monitored at these sites from a nitrogen perspective, what we found was that Lake City site, that one with the gravity inflow, that one we have the gravity inflow, and then if we have enough flow, it just goes out the outflow weir. So this one has more outflow than the others, but we saw that we reduced nitrate delivery downstream by about 2,600 pounds in 2022 and about 1,700 pounds in 2023 with that system. So you'll notice, you know, here's our inflow in the Lake City site. Here's the outflow nitrate. Here's how much went out with the irrigation. We tried to estimate what the seepage losses of nitrogen would be. And then that's unaccounted for, we would say is denitrification loss. So we saw nitrate reduction of that water that went through that, similar to the wetlands that we showed there. Story City and Dayton, because they're more of a closed system that we pump the water in, and unless we had a really flooding condition, we're not going to get any outflow. But we still saw Story City, we would have reduced downstream nitrate delivery, you know, down that stream by about 400 pounds in 2022. And the Dayton site, about 800 pounds in 2023 there. So this is kind of the really early in the stages of research work on this. So I kind of bring it up as like, maybe you'll hear more about it. Dr. Jeff Strock is doing some work on this in Minnesota as well. And as I think, you know, as we think about the potential for wetter springs and drier summers, having this water for supplemental irrigation may provide us some benefits. But is it cost effective? You know, we've been very productive with rain-fed cropping systems in a lot of these areas. Do we get enough yield benefit to pay for it? But if we get a water quality benefit, maybe there's some water quality incentives to help offset some of the cost of these systems. We're actually working on that in Iowa, that our state may help pay for the reservoir of the water. The farmer may need to pay for the irrigation system, but you know, if we're getting a water quality benefit from that reservoir, there may be some financial incentives to help pay for that. Okay, I guess to wrap it up, if we're going to reach some of these goals that are out there of a 45% nitrogen or phosphorus, but I talk about nitrogen, we're going to need it all. It's not one or the other. You know, we're going to need nitrogen management. We're going to need our cropping systems, cover crops, so forth. And we're going to need these edge of field practices. Sometimes I get accused in Iowa, all you talk about are edge of field practices. No, we need it all. It's not one or the other. We need it all. With that, that's my contact information. And you'll notice I didn't change this. I guess it's X, not Twitter anymore, but I'm still like, oh, I'm old, so I'll still use that. You can tell I'm like an analog person, right? So it's, yeah. All right. Fabian, what's that?
It's X, formerly known as.
Oh, I know. I was thinking about that, Alan. That's what I need. Yeah. Yes. Okay.
Very good. Well, let's give Matt a hand first, and thank you. So let's jump into the questions. During the process of reducing nitrate in tile line water through denitrification, is there potential for increased N2O greenhouse gas?
Yeah, that's absolutely a great question. And I'll first start off by saying I've not monitored greenhouse gas, but my colleagues have. So Dr. Crumpton has done some of that work on wetlands. And what they found was that there was N2O emission from that wetland, but not greater than if that area had been cropped. And so if you think about it's removing a lot more nitrate and it's still not emitting more N2O than if that had been cropped. One of the other factors to consider in that, and this is Morgan Davis's colleague or somebody, it's at the University of Missouri now, has looked at it. We also have to look at indirect N2O emissions. What happens if that nitrate gets into the stream? It still may be lost to N2O within the stream. And he and I guess Morgan looked at it for saturated buffers and didn't see that there was kind of a net increase in N2O compared to if that had been cropland in those systems. And I think there would be some N2O release from bioreactors, but a pretty small portion, and maybe even less than if that had been denitrified in the stream. So it is absolutely something we need to consider and continue to think about, but at least from some of that research work, I don't think we are trading a water quality problem for an air quality problem or climate, greenhouse gas emission problem.
Any concerns about increased soluble salts with irrigation design?
That's a really good question. And I'd say it's too early to know, but that is something we're monitoring. So we've taken some baseline soil samples out in these fields. One thing probably in Iowa is other than the last 4 years, we get quite a bit of water movement through the soil profile that we should be able to leach that, but we are going to look at it. Also, I've gotten some questions that we may have to look at. Is there any concern about any herbicides that might be lost with that drainage water that then you're using for the crop production? And so that may be something else to think about there. So, this is why when I think about drainage water recycling, I'm sometimes reminded a colleague, we started talking about this about 8-9 years ago, and one colleague is like, you need to go out and sell this to farmers. And I'm like, we don't know enough about it to sell people to invest a lot of money. And we're still kind of at that stage, but I think we're learning. We actually have on the ground research to start looking at that a little more now. But that's a good question and something we'd want to look at too.
Great.
No, yeah. How is that nitrogen removed if we get it into a wetland or a bioreactor or saturated buffer? It'd primarily be kind of through denitrification along, especially in the wetland, along that interface of the water column and the soil surface. So not as much from plant uptake, but more from the denitrification process in those kind of at that soil water interface that we have in the bottom of our wetlands or swamps there. So what we found when we held water back through our controlled drainage, we didn't change the concentration of nitrate with that, but we did change how much water was lost with the drainage system. So I do think holding back that water during certain times of the year can be effective. One of the challenges with controlled drainage or holding that back if we're in our crop field is when we get that rain is probably when we need the drainage too, right? So that's a little bit of the challenge with that system in the upper Midwest. If we go to Ohio and Indiana, they get about 50% of their annual drainage in the winter months. So it's kind of easier to just do a kind of a set type of, well, I would think you're going to get reductions during those times of the year. When we do it in the spring, we probably have to be a little bit more judicious with not holding water back too long that we negatively impact our field operations, so to speak. Yeah, the question is kind of, have we looked at targeting and, what's the contribution from different areas of the landscape? I would say we've not done as much of that as we should. There's probably been more work done thinking about that on phosphorus than on nitrogen. You know, and thinking about, are there more erosive areas where we want to get structures or changes? Certainly, as we look at it, you know, we probably don't have as much monitoring data at the smaller scale to be able to tease out maybe, you know, why we see some of the differences we do at small watershed scale in nutrient delivery, in part because in many cases we don't know what the nitrogen management is in those areas. Certainly, we know different parts of the state are higher in their nitrate load, at least at the Huck 8 level. And I think some of that is, you know, due to intensive crop production and probably more nutrient inputs where we have animal, livestock, and the commercial fertilizer. But we probably, I think there's more opportunity to try to understand our certain parts of the landscape losing more nitrate than others. And there's probably a lot of active research area in that. Kind of repeat it. You know, does distance to the stream factor into some of this? Does shallow water tables? I think it might. I think the confounding factor there is we could be a long ways from the stream if we just look at the surface topography, but we're very interconnected because of our drainage systems. And so, you know, if we think about some of our, at least in Iowa, and I think there's some similarity in Minnesota where we have these drainage districts, you know, that might be 1,000 or 2,000 acres. You know, you might have the upper end of the drainage district that is, you know, might be a mile to the open ditch, but it's underlain by a drainage system. And so if we think about that nitrate loss, that travel for the nitrate is still, you know, relatively short rather than, you know, if we think about a surface transport pathway. So, you know, I do think there is some opportunities there. There's some work that's been done kind of now thinking about your question a little more. Stephen Hall, now at Wisconsin, another person we lost from Iowa, but that's an aside, did some work looking at nitrate leaching, like on a transect in some fields. And what they found is some of these lower lying areas, these Okoboji soils, were big contributors of nitrate leaching, and they were big N2O. And some of these may be, you know, small parts of the field, but maybe having a disproportionate impact on some of our nutrient loss. And they may not be the greatest producing areas either, right? So one of the things that I think could be really, that we need to do more of is looking at profitability maps of fields. You know, are some of our areas not profitable? And does that coincide with areas that might be losing a lot more nutrients, you know, leaching a lot more nitrate? And I think there, you know, some of those may coincide. And, you know, if we can do something different in those areas, it may be a win-win, both for the profit for the farmer as well as for the environment. You know, but we'll you know, some of those aren't big areas, right? And then there's a hassle factor to farm around them. But I do think that's where, I think that's an area that we could use precision agriculture, precision conservation, both for, as I said, the environment and the economics for the farmer.
Very good. There are two more questions. We are out of time, but I would
okay.
like you to answer them since you came all the way from
Okay.
Iowa.
Oh,
We'll give you a couple more minutes.
Okay. One, again, why did we see a yield reduction with the early fall manure with the cover crop? And what did you see in nitrate reductions for that? So we saw the reduction, I can't remember the exact percent, for nitrate reductions with the cover crop, with the early fall manure. I think it's because it's taking up that nitrogen that might otherwise have been cycled into the nitrate form and at risk for loss. And I don't know the exact reason why we saw yield reduction in that first year. Some of it may have been early season nitrogen deficiencies, because it was very noticeable the spring following that first fall that you could see exactly where the manure had been applied in that rye, that rye was noticeably bigger. It was not quite as noticeable some of the other years. And so some of that might have been early season nitrogen availability in that, because of the specific kind of growing conditions in that year. Oh, if the focus would be just on areas that are suitable for edge of field bioreactors and saturated buffers, how much of the 45% N reduction goal would be addressed? I'm trying to remember in Iowa what we estimated. It was, okay, so in Iowa, we estimated that about half of somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of our land benefits from artificial subsurface drainage. Okay, so this is way overestimating, but if you could treat all of that with a saturated buffer and a bioreactor, which I don't think we could treat all of that, okay? But if we could treat all of that, even if it was half, and we got a 40% reduction on that, we still would probably only have about a 20%. So we might be able to get a third to a half of our reduction with that.
All right.
Probably less than that in a realistic sense. That's why I think it really illustrates we can't just do it with edge of field practices, but I don't think we can just do it with even like, I'll just say this quickly, and then I will shut up and get out of here. But, we estimate that cover crops reduce nitrate from our data, reduce nitrate leaching 30%. So even if we did that statewide, that we'd estimate, like a 30% reduction. So even if we did that everywhere, we wouldn't reach our goal. So
Very
okay,
good.
thanks.
Thank you, Matt.